Okay, I see a few early people logging in. Just a heads up, we're just about to get started here. If you have any questions or issues, you can always use the chat box right now. I'm going to enable the chat with everybody feature, so feel free to chat with fellow attendees, chat with us. If you have any questions, use the chat box. Again, if you have any questions for our panel for the Q&A period at the end, we definitely recommend that you use the Q&A box. That's we're more likely to see it if it's in the Q&A box. You can click in the Q&A box. Even if you see a question that you want answered, you can click the thumbs up symbol next to the question that you'd like to see answered, and our moderator will likely take those in the order that they're most requested. We're making a recording in full today, so you'll be able to watch this via our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel if you'd like. While we're getting going here, we have some slides just cycling through. Wanted to acknowledge our sponsors, and we also wanted to remind you to join. If you're not a member, please join CPF. It helps support our educational programs throughout the year and our mission of preserving and protecting historic places in California. We also recommend, if you are a member, to donate. Donations also help our activities throughout the year. There may have been an option for you to donate during your registration, and for those of you who did, we greatly appreciate your support, and your support makes free programs like this possible. So while we're getting going, we have about 2 minutes before the start of the program. Feel free to let us know where you're coming from. Let me enable your chat. And welcome to today's program. We have quite a few people, so please do ask those questions early if you have them. Don't hesitate to ask them at the beginning of the program. We'll take them at the end for the 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A period. We'll see you at the beginning of the program in about 2 minutes. Okay, I wanted to welcome everybody to today's program. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. Today's, excuse me, today's program will be an hour in length, so please do ask those questions early. You can use the Q&A box. You'll also notice that there's an option to enable closed captioning for today's program. If you need that feature, you can simply click on the CC button on the bottom of the screen. If you'd like to ask your question for our panel in person, you're more than welcome to use the raise hand feature. You would simply click the raise hand, and I'll keep an eye out for that, and we can enable your microphone and your video if you'd like to ask your question. Other than that, recordings will be available on our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel. If you'd like to continue to support CPF, we encourage you to visit our website by visiting californiapreservation.org/join or californiapreservation.org/donate to make a donation. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to John Roosh, who's on our education committee. And John will be introducing our panel today, as well as kick it off for the beginning of the program. So thank you, John, for your time today, and take it away. Oh, I think you're you may be muted.
Yes, I am. Okay. Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today's discussion on community-informed heritage practices. My name is John Rush, and I'm a historic preservation planner for Architectural Resources Group. I'd like to thank the California Preservation Foundation for their help organizing this webinar. And I'd also like to specifically acknowledge Sana Ahmed, another member of the Education Committee, who's the Student and Family Program Manager for the Los Angeles Conservancy, who is my collaborator in planning today's event. And you'll hear from Sana in just a moment. As a brief introduction to the webinar, the purpose of this discussion is to highlight two case studies that help to illustrate the involvement of community members and their voices into formal preservation and public history venues. This is a CPF event, but we wish to define preservation broadly, and the case studies are in different areas of the heritage field. The first involves the formal recognition of a site significant in the history of Los Angeles' Watts neighborhood and aims to maintain it as a vital hub of Black arts and community. The second case study is an innovative approach to interpreting the 20th century history of the Presidio, a former military installation with a complex historical legacy and now a popular historic site in San Francisco. What these examples have in common is the involvement of voices from communities traditionally excluded from formal preservation and museum institutions, which expands the public understanding of historic places and their legacies, with the goal of reframing them as dynamic sites that tie complex histories to a complex present. So to kick things off, we want to start with a bit of engagement of our own. So I'll ask Sana to lead a brief participatory exercise.
Thanks, John. So in a moment, I will drop a link in the chat that I invite you all to click on. This link will take you to a Mentimeter question. If any of you have used Mentimeter before, you'll click on this link, a question will pop up, and you'll be able to respond to that question. And in a moment, I'll pull up my screen and we'll be able to see those responses populate as you all are responding. And so a bit more engaging way to hear from you all and learn a little bit about you all and your interests before we hear from our wonderful panelists today. So I'm going to share my screen first, and then I will drop a link in the chat so that we can hear from you all. All right, so I've dropped a link in the chat. The link will take you to a tab. It will look a little different than my screen, but you should be able to respond to this question. And I do want to mention, this doesn't have to be a paragraph, it could be a short sentence, words, a series of words, but we really would like to hear from you. And what does community partnership look like for you and or your organization currently? Or what would you like it to look like if you're exploring ways to engage community partners? So take a moment, think about this question. We'd love to hear ideas. Once we see those ideas, they'll populate on this screen so we can kind of get in a pulse on where you all are right now in this topic. So I see some responses coming in: inclusive and equitable, working and crafting solutions with expert groups and individuals, regular communication, active engagement through participation in a broad range of community events. These are all fantastic ideas. I'm getting really excited about all of these. Building relationships within the community so we can reframe historic preservation, historic home ownership as a positive versus a burden, based on trust, right? This is going to be a topic you'll hear today from our panelists. Public awareness, mentorship, linking people to their roots, curiosity, deep listening. I love that. So it's fantastic that you all are thinking about these different ways to incorporate community partnership, thinking about ways that this work is valuable in creating an impact within the communities that you all are working with. Feel free to continue to add to this. And I think what I'll do is I can save this and send this to CPF after today, and perhaps we can provide that somewhere in some shared space where I can view these responses to continue thinking about this question. I'm going to pass this back to John, who will begin our conversation with our panelists. Thank you, everyone.
Yep, thanks, Sana. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Rita Cofield received her BA in Architecture and Planning from Howard University and a Master's in Heritage Conservation from the University of Southern California. She freelances as a cultural resource manager and public historian with valuable experience in community-based projects. She is passionate about finding ways to reinsert multiple perspectives into the larger narratives of our history. She enjoys activities and projects that foster innovation when it comes to caring for historic resources in underserved neighborhoods. Liz Melliker is an experienced museum professional with expertise in curatorial practice, including creative direction, research, content development, and collections management. She is the curator for the Presidio Trust in San Francisco in the traditional territory of the Yelamu, a local tribe of the Ramaytush Ohlone. Liz leads the Trust's curation program, preserving and sharing the Presidio's collections with current and future generations. Liz has led award-winning exhibition projects recognized by the American Alliance of Museums and the Western Museums Association, including the exhibition she'll be discussing today. She holds an MA in anthropology from Stanford University. Laura Cowan organizes communities towards liberatory futures. For the last 4 years, she has been supporting other non-native people to live in right relationship with the Lishan Ohlone people in the territory of Huichin, where she lives in San Francisco's East Bay. Prior to that, Laura founded and directed the Adoption Museum Project. This culture change project used arts and culture to explore the US practice of adoption through a social justice lens in order to create a more truthful and healing narrative of adoption. So with that, I'd like to turn the stage over to our first speaker, Rita Cofield.
Thanks, John and Sana, for welcoming me into this space just to share about my experiences with community preservation. And also, I'm a member of the education committee for CPF as well as a trustee. So it's really a great honor just to continue to work with CPF as they, open up really some new ways to communicate and what it means to preserve all of our histories. So thanks. I'm going to bring up my slide. Can everybody see the What's Happening Cultural Center?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, good. Rita Cofield. I always like to start with where I was born and raised because I am proud to still live there. So I was born and raised just outside of Watts in the Florence Firestone area. I'm a cultural resource manager and a preservationist, and I work at the Getty Conservation Institute, which is one of 4 programs underneath the Getty Trust. Our sister program is, of course, everyone knows the Getty Museum up on the hill. And I'm working currently on a project called the African American Historic Places Los Angeles, which we're about to do our community kickoff. I believe it's next weekend, the 24th, the following weekend. And I also volunteer my time with an organization called the Friends at Mafundi, or FAM for short. And the group formed to save a community space in Watts called the What's Happening Cultural Center. I'll briefly walk you through how the community managed to save the Mafundi building, or Mafundi building for short, but the What's Happening Cultural Center from the threat of demolition. But before I do that, I think it's important to understand the Watts community before the 1965 uprising. So by the 1920s, Blacks all over the United States were emboldened to acquire economic power and break free from mainstream art institutions that discriminated against them. And this was caused by, due in part by the rise of Pan-Africanism, led by Marcus Garvey and the New Negro movement, or better known as the Harlem Renaissance. So entertainment venues, because of this movement, entertainment venues sprang up all along Central Avenue and flowed into the Watts area. We know Central Avenue as the Jazz Corridor But not a lot of people know that after the jazz joints closed down at 2 a.m. Because Watts was outside of the territory of the city, they could extend they had no curfew. So along Central Avenue, these entertainment venues flowed right into the Watts area and ushered in what we call the first Renaissance in Watts. And some of those figures who participated in the early music and art scene of the Watts Renaissance also grew up in Watts. There are artists like Buddy Collette, Charles Mingus, saxophone player, the Woodman brothers, and the renowned Harlem Renaissance poet, Arna Bontemps. And because of this early art scene in Watts, it wasn't a surprise to find that months after the 1965 Watts uprising, several cultural arts institutions sprang up. And one was the Watts Happening Coffee House. Other institutions were the Watts Towers Arts Center that was built in 1970. So the Watts Happening Coffee House was an abandoned furniture store that turned into an art gallery and gathering space for the Watts community. It became home of the Watts Writers Workshop, which was a writer's program put together or created by Bud Schulberg, and also a program that Bobby Kennedy, when he visited Watts, he wanted to put the Watts Writers Workshop in every school in America. That's how amazing the Watts Writers Workshop was. So the Mafundi Institute was also another group that found the Watts Happening Coffee House as their home. And the Mafundi Institute was a group of eclectic artists who met at the coffee house. So by the time the coffee house was condemned and those using it had to find other places to serve, the Mafundi Institute became a much needed and well-respected multidisciplinary arts organization. So much so that it garnered the attention of Maya Angelou that you see in this picture of a clip from her series, her KQED series entitled Blacks, Blues, Black, that she ran in 1968. So with the War on Poverty funds coming into the Watts community, support from private entities like the Kettering and Brooks Foundation and fundraising efforts that were led by artists like Diane Carroll and Marge Champion, who her and her husband were the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers of their time. A new building was built in 1970. It was a year behind schedule, but it was designed by two Black architects, Robert Kennard and Arthur Silvers, during their partnership. And both architects were active in civil rights and both USC graduates. So the Mafundi Institute's new home was given a new name, the Watts Happening Cultural Center, by its designers. Sometime before the construction, the name was changed to the Watts Neighborhood Center for what some believe to be political reasons, and also because the building was a city, it was a city-owned and a government-funded building. They wanted to distance themselves from the supposed radicals that led the Watts Happening Coffee House. Since then, it's gone by several names, including the Robert Pitts Neighborhood Center, after a long-term civil servant in the housing administration field, Robert Pitts. The community also calls it for short the Mafundi Building because there's a Mafundi, because of the Mafundi mural, and the Mafundi means artists or creative people in Swahili. So despite the name change, it was still connected to its origins. It became one of the most prominent cultural centers in Los Angeles from 1970 to 1975. And it was the only cultural center of its kind in any Black neighborhood anywhere in the US at the time. It was a gathering place for local artists, writers, musicians, filmmakers, poets, and community organizations. It was a project that was led by artists. It was for artists. And it was a building for people, for community and a team. It was really a dream facility for the community of Watts. So because the funding for the Mafundi Institute strategically dried up and relationships among the board members of the Mafundi Institute were tumultuous, the Institute closed its doors in 1975. The building has since been used by organizations such as the Watts Credit Union, the Los Angeles Education Corps, and various other community organizations, including the Watts Coffee House, that has existed tucked into the corner of the building since 1997, and it is still there, and is also still the only full-service sit-down restaurant in Watts. So you can see why, and just giving you the background and the history, you can see why some of the community were in disbelief when they learned that a proposal for housing was planned for the site in late 2019. Some of our elected officials were not convinced that the worn late modern building was worth saving until community spoke up very loudly, especially a community griot or storyteller by the name of Father Amdi Hamilton. Father Amdi is the last remaining member of the Watts Prophets, which is a spoken word performance group that grew from the Watts Writers Workshop. He was the first to appeal to then Mayor Buscaino and explain the history and significance and the importance of the Watts Happening Cultural Center to community ad nauseum. He succeeded in getting language in that proposal added to the revised proposal. And that language acknowledged the importance of the building to the community of Watts, but it still didn't provide any guarantee that it would not be demolished by chosen developers. It was still an option for demolition. So an increasing number of established, we had not only change.org petitions, we had write-ups from newspaper. Spectrum did a presentation, did a news article on us. There was a lot of buzz around the Mafundi building because, if not for community raising the issue, and even we had to even educate some folks in the community who actually wanted to replace it with a newer building. So I believe that part of the reason for the demolition or the allowance for demolition, because it was seen as the only option for the cultural center, was its narrative, the existing narrative of Watts and its assets. There was really a belief that Watts had no assets. So that's why I kind of started with pre-1965, because when people think about Watts, they think of the 1965 Watts revolt, but not many people knew or still know about the rich history of Watts prior to that. Even before learning of the demolition, I myself had just recently learned of the many artists that lived in Watts that I described, like Buddy Collette in the early 1900s, and how many residents had pianos in their homes. There's a picture of a Watts family, and the family looks, and there's two daughters and a mother and father, and the daughter is they're standing outside their home, and the daughter is holding a violin. So there were a lot of misnomers about Watts gathered from the Watts Rebellion. So I like to remind people and continue to remind myself to learn about just the rich history that happened before the '65 rebellion. So there were Watts community, the Watts artists that influenced the Harlem Renaissance with their ideals, as much as the Harlem Renaissance influenced them. I also didn't know a lot about the multidisciplinary arts classes. Stars like Marla Gibbs took art classes there. She was the star of 227 and the Jeffersons. Even Roger E. Mosley, who became one of our advisory board members, who passed away, I think, a year and a half ago. He was involved in the Watts Happening Cultural Center, first as a student and then as a teacher. So I'm continuing to learn about this cultural center and the role it played in the community of Watts and the role it continues to play. So for many, the negative narrative of the Watts Rebellion blocked out their ability to tell a fuller story of Watts, in my opinion. So it was easy for me when stakeholders in the community approached me about helping to ensure the building wouldn't be easily demolished. They approached me at the end of 2019. And at that time, I was working on finishing my thesis to graduate with a master's in heritage conservation from USC. So I knew a little bit about the benefits and the strengths of a local designation. And so I agreed to write the nomination for the Historic Cultural Monument designation. This was also an opportunity to expand the narrative of Watts beyond the '65 rebellion and place it back into the framework of Mafundi, or creative people. This is why the name Watts Happening Cultural Center has prevailed more than the other names that it's called. So in Los Angeles, anyone can submit a historic cultural monument landmark nomination to the city's Cultural Heritage Commission. A property owner, any other individual or group. So this is my first official designation application, but with the help of veteran preservationists like Christy McAvoy, community support and input, and the guidance of staff in the Office of Historic Resources, and especially with the help of LA Conservancy, who helped us to navigate and understand the designation process. We were able to put together a pretty compelling application for the significance of the cultural center, starting before the '65 rebellion. We wrote change.org, we continue to write change.org positions, we continue to rally the community and to educate the community on the cultural importance of the building and the implications if we lost it. We had to convince some of the community members that saving the building from demolition didn't mean stopping progress or change. We wanted to manage that change and find alternative solutions to tearing down the building for housing. So the proposal for housing was subsequently withdrawn and then canceled shortly after the Cultural Heritage Commission unanimously voted to recommend the Watts Happening Cultural Center become a historic cultural monument. And in September of 2021, the full city council voted to give the property at 1827 East 103rd Street historic cultural monument status. So the Friends at Mafundi continue to advocate for the adaptive reuse of the building, and at the very least, advocate for its adaptive reuse. And at best, we are encouraging the city, because it's still a city-owned property, to restore and revive it as a cultural arts center. The city of Los Angeles has approximately 1,280 local historic cultural monuments, and only 4% of those are associated with African American heritage. So I leave you with these questions. As you know, we think about barriers to preserving historic sites in African American communities, which is the project that I'm working on with a joint project between the city of LA and the Office of Historic Resources and Getty Conservation Institute to look at these barriers and to, try and increase that number from 4%. It was actually 3% at the beginning of the year. Now it's increased to 4%. With that, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Rita. And just as a reminder to everybody, we will be taking questions throughout these presentations, and then towards the end of the webinar today, then we'll open the stage for the Q&A session. So I'd like to hand it over to Liz and Laura now.
Thank you so much, John. Will we get our slides going? Just want to say good afternoon to everyone. And thank you so much to the California Preservation Foundation, John in particular, for inviting us to participate in the webinar today. It's an honor and a privilege to join you all to talk about something very near and dear to our hearts around community engagement strategies for interpretation at historic sites. As John noted earlier, I'm Liz Melliker. I'm the curator for the Presidio Trust in San Francisco. As we start today, we wanted to acknowledge that the present day Presidio occupies the traditional territory of the Yelamu, a local tribe of Ramaytush Ohlone, and I am speaking to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok. I'm delighted to be co-presenting, couldn't imagine it any other way, with Laura Callan.
Hey, I'm just pulling this up again.
So to start, if you could do next slide, please, Laura. We wanted to share a brief bit of background about the Presidio, its history, and its current management for context. Today, the Presidio is a national park site located at the southern terminus of the Golden Gate Bridge. But before there was a Presidio, there was a village called Petlinook, home to Ohlone people who lived on the shore of the San Francisco Bay. By some estimates, more than 30,000 people lived in the Greater Bay Area at the time of European contact, making it one of the most densely populated parts of native North America. Into this landscape, El Presidio Real de San Francisco was built as part of Spain's colonial project in 1776 at California's most valuable port and at the far edge of the Spanish Empire. The Presidio would eventually serve as a military post and as a result a site of colonization and imperialism under three flags, those of Spain, Mexico, and the United States. The Presidio's 218-year tenure as a military post ended in 1994, and at the time, it was the longest continually operating military post in the United States. Today, the National Park is a National Historic Landmark District managed by two federal agencies, the National Park Service and the Presidio Trust. The Trust, which is the organization I work for, is an innovative federal agency created to preserve the Presidio after the Army left, to transform it for a new national purpose, and to steward and share it for everyone to enjoy forever. We call it a forever park. Next slide, please. One of the ways in which we both steward and share the Presidio is through our curatorial program, which is jointly charged with both preserving the Presidio's collections and sharing them with the public through means like exhibitions. And that's what we'll talk about particularly today. In developing exhibitions, our curatorial philosophy is based in shared authority and underpinned by several key approaches. We do place-based interpretation, meaning that all of our exhibitions are rooted in Presidio history, and we hope to instill in visitors a curiosity and a historical imagination to go back out into the park and explore various historical sites as part of their visit. We use a micro-historical approach and a storytelling approach, which is really about employing emotional connections at a very intimate scale to explore individual people, their relationships, and their everyday lives. And one of my favorite ways of kind of characterizing microhistory is the idea of asking large questions in small spaces. We also ascribe to the fact that the past is continually being understood and discovered, and history is continually being written. That is, it's not static. So there's ongoing discovery of the past, of place, whether that's formal research or community-based knowledge, or even our changing perspectives, technologies, and approaches to the past. And lastly, we also privilege many ways of knowing, that idea of intentionally working to juxtapose different ways of understanding the past, not to privilege necessarily one way over another, but hopefully see them as compatible and complementary approaches to understanding. So in our permanent exhibitions, which is what's pictured here on the screen, an individual event or story or person may only be represented by one artifact or a short caption. I like to say it's 10,000 years of human history in 5,000 square feet. So, a tall order. So special exhibitions like the one we're going to talk about today really offer an opportunity to explore the Presidio's history much more deeply and allow for fresh perspectives and a deeper understanding of things that are presented in the permanent exhibition. So with those kind of broad curatorial approaches in mind, I'll turn now to the special exhibition, Operation Babylift, Perspectives and Legacies. For a bit of historical context, in April 1975, at the end of the Vietnam War, the US government and individual citizens removed more than 2,000 Vietnamese children to be adopted by American families. The effort was called Operation Babylift. Some people saw it as a humanitarian effort beyond politics. Others saw it as a political ploy to ease public guilt about the war. And yet others saw it as unethical or illegal, despite good intentions. The decades-long conflict in Vietnam was drawing to a close, with millions of people killed or displaced. And large numbers of children were in crisis, whether orphaned, abandoned, or placed by families in foster care or orphanages for temporary care. The US Agency for International Development estimated by 1975 that 1.2 million Vietnamese children were in distress, and nearly 23,000 lived in orphanages. There was concern on the part of the US government and adoption agencies that children, as the war drew to a close and the reunification of Vietnam was imminent, that children already placed for adoption wouldn't be able to leave, and also potentially that children, particularly those of Amerasian ancestry, might be harmed. Operation Babylift played out with particular intensity in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was the first and largest of the US reception locations. The Presidio was the heart of the volunteer effort, which brought together almost 5,500 people from very diverse backgrounds to care for children in crisis. On April 2nd, 1975, the first flight with Vietnamese children reached the Bay Area. From then through May 4th, Harmon Hall, which was an Army Reserve building in the Presidio, and it's pictured at the lower right of the screen, it became their temporary home. More than 1,500 children passed through the Presidio in that month-long period. Over half of them arrived in the first week. And at the same time, Operation Babylift was being debated in headlines, hospitals, courtrooms, and living rooms of America. And you see a headline in the right center there, for example. Oh, and I'm seeing a note that the slide transition has stalled. Laura, do you think we could try resharing screen? Awesome. Okay, and we're ready for the next slide. Okay. So our curatorial challenge, we felt, was how we could approach this very complicated emotional event in a way that would honor the deep and profound impacts it had on those involved, and yet also move beyond the dominant narrative, a narrative story, if you will, that's generally told by the adult volunteers and workers who are involved, and that plays on fears and whether they're realized or not, and also the idea, the myth that love conquers all in adoption. So we really felt that the best way to approach this would be partnering with a co-curator. We had worked with community experts in a number of ways while developing the permanent exhibitions, and we realized we wanted to really attempt to fully share authority, vision, and leadership with a partner, especially one who would bring a sensitivity, a nuance, both of subject matter expertise and lived experience. And that is where our co-curator, the Adoption Museum Project, came in. And with that, I'm so delighted to turn it over to Laura.
Laura, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but can't see the slides.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back and
Okay.
grab the slides. Sorry about that. It seems that if I am sharing the slides, then you can't hear me. So I wonder if someone else can run the slides.
I can run them. Give me 1 second here. Move this over to a different screen. Okay. Am I on the right? Oh, I have to move forward. Is it
There
this
you
slide?
go.
Okay.
Go back one. There you go. Thank you so much. Apologies for the technical glitch. So Adoption Museum Project's role in the project is to center that story of adoption with deep integrity. My own lived experience as an adopted person, and sort of through that and the work that I do, knowledge about adoption at both the very macro level, the system and practice of adoption, as well as the micro level and its impact on individuals. And also, again, through lived experience, ability to invite and to build relationships with collaborators. And the idea in involving Adoption Museum Project was to ensure that adoption would not be a dramatic device, relying on stereotypes and echoing some of what Liz was saying, that this experience would be held with dignity and with a lot of honesty, including the ways in which the system and the practice of adoption, both during Operation Babylift and even today, can cause profound harm. And we really wanted to make space for that piece as well. Next slide, please. So this project had many parts to it. We had the gallery itself, and Liz is going to tell us more about that in just a moment. But in addition to the gallery space, we had a whole schedule, a calendar of public programs. There were 9 different public programs that we ran while the exhibition was available to visitors. And so this just gives you an overview, sort of snapshot. The exhibition ran for roughly a year. We were really thrilled with the number of visits that the exhibition enjoyed, and you'll hear more about reflection cards in the gallery, but we were able to collect 350 different reflection cards over the course of the exhibition. Next slide. So John, this is a build, so you can click and the first word's going to appear. So Liz and I were holding many intentions for our work together, really anchoring into this idea of emotion. Certainly the event and the material was emotional, but we also wanted to engage ourselves and our collaborators and visitors on an emotional level. And again, we're also going to talk more about what that looked like and what that meant for us. We also were holding an intention to bring complexity into the story, multiple identities, multiple roles that people played in this event and multiple perspectives. We also were thinking a lot about bringing a justice lens to this project. And for us, what that meant is that in the story we were telling, we wanted to make the power gaps and the harms visible. We wanted to make them part of the story without saying this entire event is wrong. And of course, we were also not saying this entire event was right? But we were wanting to really lift up that there were questions of justice to be thought about. We, as I was speaking about earlier, we were really holding adoption as a point of focus. Because through the adoption story of Operation Babylift, we see human impact and we see the complexity of the larger Operation Babylift event. And this part of Operation Babylift, the one that we were telling, is also not very well known. So we were just, really interested in lifting that up as well. And as I think we all know, right, in telling the particular, we also get at universal themes. Another intention was to connect the past to the present, so working with questions that people could bring forward into their current lives. We spoke with participants about their past experience and how they are holding that today, and many other ways that we were making that connection. And then lastly, we were really holding an intention to really value the physicality of this project, really using physical space and objects, as well as Harmon Hall, to help the audience access what is a really complex, really abstract, emotional topic. Next slide.
So we'll very, very briefly do a kind of quick walkthrough of the gallery just to give a little sense of how this appeared in person. John, if you could mouse over the dot on the far right dot on the screen. Yeah. Okay, so we'll talk about 4 main sections of the exhibition. This first one was a multimedia timeline. So we really wanted to talk about the importance of context, as Laura talked about, giving a sense of the events leading up to April 1975, and then also looking at the long-lasting impacts of the airlift that are still playing out today. If you could mouse over the dot right in the center of the screen. Okay, at the literal heart of the exhibition, and also really the core of how we worked with community members developing the exhibition, it was focused on dialogue. So this was a section of the exhibition about the power of listening to each other. And it was 6 dialogues that were recorded between 2 people who had taken part in Operation Babylift, one who was an adoptee and one who was an adult participant. Let's see, John, if you could mouse over the top left, that's it. Another section where we really brought multivocality and physicality together was a small object case with not many artifacts related to the exhibition, but what we did, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is we invited community members to write labels, and each artifact had multiple labels, really very clearly and explicitly showcasing many ways of understanding or thinking about a single object. And then if you wouldn't mind, there is a dot right underneath that in the bottom left corner. That's the one. And then we really wanted to extend this idea of multivocality to all visitors to the exhibition, not just the community members who helped us shape it, but anyone who helped shape it in this participatory fashion. So we had a section that was about reflecting and pausing and contemplating the present day reverberations of this event, whether specific to the event or, like Laura was talking about, some more universal or broad themes that might resonate with visitors. So there was an opportunity to actually write and share a reflection and put it on the wall there that you see, so that visitors had an opportunity to contribute and add to the many voices and many truths represented in this exhibition. With that, I'll turn it back to Laura.
Great. So I'm looking at the clock, and I know we have just a few minutes left. So we had put together a few additional slides that I think we're going to jump over. So John, if you could fast forward to, I'll tell you when to stop. So these slides that we're not going to cover just go into more detail about the points that we were just making earlier. So we're sad that we can't share them, but we want to make sure to stay on track. So keep going. So there should be one slide before that. Right before that. So yeah, you can leave it on the last, that question slide would be great. So this question that's in the title of the slide, we wanted to bring back and share with you this idea of being changed by the work, especially in the context of preservation. Liz and I were really struck by how much this project was a project about allowing ourselves to open up on an emotional level and to let ourselves be changed by the work. And once that was happening, how it rippled through everything else. And so we wanted to bring that concept forward and offer it as a question that all of you might be able to hold and to consider as you're doing your own work in your own projects.
Hey, thank you so much. These were both really excellent, thought-provoking case studies to hear about. And we want to give participants the chance to provide some additional questions if you have any into the Q&A box. We can start the Q&A with a question that Sana and I had prepared. So for our panelists, how have you measured or assessed success in your projects? And how have these factors contributed to the long-term impact and relationship building of the projects? So kind of broad questions, big ones, but invite any thoughts that you have.
I'm wondering, Laura, if we, in this idea of thinking about evaluating, if we want to talk about the work that Lacey did in terms of engaging with the visitor reflections as a way of thinking about how people were interacting with the exhibition.
Yeah, that's a great example. So there was a graduate student at a museum studies program in the Bay Area, JFK University, and also an adopted person. And we connected with this young woman named Lacey, and she proposed a project she was going to use as her thesis for graduate school. And she decided to study the reflection cards. So again, there were over 350 of them that people wrote and displayed in the gallery over the course of the exhibition. And she went through a really fascinating process of looking across all of the cards for themes, kind of distilling down the essence of what was being shared in the card and arriving at various themes. And so we weren't planning to do this in advance because we met Lacey once the project had started development. But those themes gave us a lot of really important information that was coming from visitors about their experience and about the impact. And those cards also, we had the questions written in both English as well as Vietnamese. And so there was also a way that we were able to get feedback and get input from a really important community in this project that we hoped we would be able to reach out to and invite into the project.
Thank you. And I'm seeing some really excellent comments coming through on the chat. Just somebody who was remembering seeing this exhibition a few years ago and commenting on the level of scholarship and the emotion that it elicited. So that's a really excellent comment to see. So there are a couple of questions that came through in the Q&A box that would both be for Liz and Laura. So the first question is Operation Babylift a permanent exhibition? And if not, is it still on? And then there's a second related question of just asking if you can comment on the design, which amplified its impact, and who designed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Both great questions. So Operation Babylift was a special exhibition. It ran from April of 2015, which was the 40th anniversary of the airlift, for a year till April 2016. It is available. I'll go ahead and drop in the chat for everyone in just a second. We do have a kind of virtual version of it on both the Trust website and the Adoption Museum Project website, so we can put both of those links in. So a lot of the content is available on the web. And then in terms of design, we worked with Volume Inc. That did the exhibition design, and Gizmo Art Studio were the fabricators. And we actually engaged our community collaborators, over 40 individuals who worked directly with us in all facets of the exhibition development, from the concept all the way through the final content. And we engaged them in the design work as well. So it's really reflective of not only fabulous professional exhibition design, but also the community collaborators' thoughts as well.
So another question we can pose is, what strategies have been helpful in building relationships and trust between institutions and community partners what challenges and successes have you faced doing this work? I'm thinking that Rita, for your case study, this might be, you have a couple of different roles in preservation, professionally and personally, but I'm wondering if maybe you could speak to this as a community member working with organizations like the LA Conservancy with the Mafundi building.
I think it's important for organizations to listen, to build trust. So LA Conservancy, when I was writing the nomination, and other preservation professionals sort of listened and provided guidance, but it was in a way that was very considerate of a culture that was not familiar to them, but still able to provide guidance in terms of the preservation process without overstepping and saying, you got to be more heavily architectural significance. There's no architectural significance. Like the direction that I was going in, they were supportive and understood that the cultural significance of the What's Happening Cultural Center. So that was very helpful. And it also just allowed me to ask more questions and to be open to trust their answers. So building trust, what is it? Operate at the speed of trust. That's the sort of phrase. And I think out of, from the Office of Historic Resources to our preservation partners, to those who are helping us now, it's just trusting that the community knows what's best for the community. No one else has to come in and say, we've done it this way, so let's keep doing it that way.
Yeah, that's a fabulous observation.
I would add to that. I totally agree, Rita, with that and the importance of trust. And I think the corollary is making time to work with community, because building trust and then being willing to hear feedback and then make changes based on feedback, it takes time, and to build timelines that allow for that, which is really hard to do a lot of times. But we spent a year developing the project, and that included the actual design work and fabrication and all those things, but there was a lot of that time was spent in collaboration with our community partners. So I would just add time.
This is potentially a closely related question, but what advice do you have for those interested in taking a public or community-centered approach to heritage conservation? This would probably be a good kind of wrapping up, synthesizing opportunities. So, given that we just have a few minutes left.
Can you repeat, John? Sorry.
Oh, sure. What advice do you have for those interested in taking a public or community-centered approach to heritage conservation?
If I could say, go with what you know. I mean, you have skills as a community member, you have certain skill sets, and then you fill in what you don't know. And you don't have to know everything. You don't have to know how to describe architectural, columns, or know all the history or where to get things. You start where you start and you just fill in. And it should be a community, a group effort. With the nomination for the Mafundi building, I had griots telling me stories, about things that I didn't know. And then I was able to research and back it up, but I wouldn't have been able to start with the research first and then tell those stories. So reaching out, to the folks in your community that are as passionate about saving spaces and places as you are is a good start.
I think that is such sage wisdom. And to offer a perspective for an organization wanting to engage the community in work in some way. I think one of the most important things can be is being very clear about expectations, and truthful. It starts with being, what as an organization, being honest and clear and thoughtful about what it is your expectations of how community engagement, what that will look like, what level of engagement, what level of participation are you seeking from the community in your work. And then to echo what Rita and Laura said earlier, and I don't think we can overemphasize time, listening, regular, clear communications as part of trust building that's so necessary for this kind of work.
And I'll add, again, this idea of being willing to open yourself emotionally to the work. I think to do community-based work, it's relational, right? No matter what the outcome in terms of the physical design and the objects and all of that matters, but it emerges out of relationship. And I think in order to do that in a way that has authenticity and integrity, which is, I believe, is felt by visitors. I think you yourself, right, the curator, anybody who's on the team, being willing to open to this, on some emotional level, and to just allow that to sort of circulate through you. And I think you can't really know in advance what happens from there, but I think that's a really key ingredient.
And Liz and Laura, I will just add to my question, extend it with something that is in the Q&A. So for your project, can you speak a bit more about how the community members were identified, and advice you have for agencies who are working on identifying and engaging community members?
Yeah, I know it can be sometimes the hardest part. And I think one of the important roles of your community partners, so in this case, Adoption Museum Project, had many, you already had many contacts and relationships that we were able to reach out to, and already had some kind of established connection, which is really essential, especially working with a really emotional topic. And so trust being important. So it was a combination of relationships that Adoption Museum Project already had, and then research, right? So we did a whole bunch of research to identify different agencies and different individuals who we may not have had a connection with, but we then had a name and then we could reach out. But, it's sort of a cliche, but it's really true, networking, starting with who you know, asking them if they know others, really, really crucial. And we definitely leaned on that quite a bit.
Okay, thank you so much. So seeing that it's very nearly 1 p.m. here on the West Coast, I think this might be the time to close our program. Thank everybody again for attending today. Also, a huge thanks to our presenters and sharing their work on really impactful projects. So thank you very much. We sincerely appreciate it, and we hope that you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to also thank our education committee members, John and Sana, who were critical in organizing this program. So in addition to our speakers, of course. So I did leave some links in the chat box. Let us know how we did. I'll share that with the speakers, and also join us for our program on June the 30th, where you'll also have a chance to take a look at our new nominated trustees as well, and learn about our annual, join our annual meeting. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a wonderful day, rest of the day.
Thanks, John. You too.